Hi everyone and welcome to session 3. I'm Jess from our governance and risk team.
And I'm Ellie from the promoting compliance team.
As Ali just mentioned, in the session we're going to run through the children's risk assessment duties, and then we're also going to walk you through the protection of children digital support tool. So we'll kick off with a quick run through of the children's risk assessment duties. So all user-to-user and search service providers need to complete a children's risk assessment for every service you provide that's likely to be accessed by children. You need to complete this by the 24th of July or within 3 months of a service you provide becoming likely to be accessed by children. The outcome of the children's risk assessment will help you to identify any risks to children on your service and also to determine the safety measures we recommend in our codes of practice to mitigate any risks that you identify in the assessment. Your children's risk assessment has to separately assess the risk of children encountering each kind of content harmful to children. This means the 4 kinds of primary priority content, the 8 kinds of priority content, and any kinds of non-designated content you identify for assessment. As you're doing this, you have to take into account Ofcom's children's risk profiles, and you also have to consider the characteristics of your service. For example, when you consider your user base, you need to think about your user number, the different age groups of children on your service, and any children in vulnerable groups. You've also got to think about specific features and functionalities, including those which enable adults to search for and contact children, those which make search predictions, and any features or functionalities that affect how much children use your service. As you're doing this, you need to consider the role and efficacy of any existing controls you have on the service to mitigate risks to children. Now, your children's risk assessment has to be suitable and sufficient. This means it has to include all of the elements of a children's risk assessment that is set out in the Act. It also needs to be specific to your service and reflect the risks accurately. In our children's risk assessment guidance, we provide a 4-step methodology to help you to complete this requirement. This is also the structure of the digital tool that we're about to go through with you. Finally, you have to keep a record of every children's risk assessment you carry out. You've got to keep your children's risk assessment up to date, and we recommend reviewing it annually. And you've also got to carry out a new assessment before making any significant change to your service's design or operation. There are also additional record-keeping duties for Category 1 and 2A services. Now, we've run through the duties very quickly, and we're going to move over to the demo part of the session. So if we get the demo up on the screen, we're conscious that the Online Safety Act is brand new legislation with a suite of new duties for thousands of services to comply with. So we've developed a range of tools and services to break down these obligations and to support services to meet them. The digital tool we're about to go through is a companion to the Children's Risk Assessment Guidance for service providers. Ofcom has to produce this guidance under the Act to help providers, and the digital tool breaks this down step by step for you. So Ellie is now just showing you how to navigate to the tool from our landing page.
So we'll start off on the online safety section of the Ofcom website. And from here, you've got a quick link that takes you through to the Guide for Services page. The Guide for Services page has all the information you need as it comes to complying with the Online Safety Act as a whole. On the top of the page, you'll see the Online Safety Act's legal content tool, and then further down the page, we've got check how to comply with the protection of children rules. If you click on Start Now, you come through to the landing page for this tool, and then you come through to the tool itself. For the purpose of the demo, we're going to be acting as a service that has not done an assessment previously, so we'll start a new assessment. And then you'll get one question ahead of actually entering the tool, which is whether you're a user-to-user service or a search service. We provide a separate journey depending on the type of service you are here, so you'd need to make your selection before continuing on. And then you will be provided with your unique reference number. The unique reference number is the way in which we provide the services with a way of re-entering the tool and saving their progress as you go in, but doing so whilst also allowing you full anonymity. So we don't store any personally identifiable information at all at this point. So you would copy your unique reference number, confirm that you've stored that, and then you'd continue into the tool itself.
Awesome, thanks Ellie. So the 4 steps set out in the digital tool and the guidance documents have been developed to help you comply with the children's risk assessment duties, connected record keeping duties, and they also link to the protection of children's safety duties. The 4 steps are, firstly, to understand the content harmful to children that you need to assess. Secondly, to assess the risk of harm arising from this content. Thirdly, to decide the measures that you need to mitigate these risks, to implement and record them. And then finally, to report, review, and update your children's risk assessment. And I'll now pass back to Ellie to talk you through the functionality.
So what you might have noticed on this page is that we can enter our steps 1 and step 4, but you currently cannot enter into step 2. The reason for that is that we provide dynamic content to you throughout steps 2 and 3 that's based off of information that we'll gather in step 1. So as such, you'd always have to complete step 1 before gaining access to the first 2 steps. As you can see here, the unique reference number is always available on the top of the page as well to help you hold access to that.
Brilliant. So step 1 is mostly about taking you through Ofcom's children's risk profiles. You must take account of the children's risk profiles when you're carrying out a children's risk assessment. There are 2 risk profiles relating to content harmful to children, one for search services and one for user-to-user services. You should look to the relevant profile and use it to identify any functionalities that could be risk factors for content harmful to children. For the purposes of this demo, we're going to walk you through with the user-to-user risk profile, which is the slightly longer of the 2. Recording the outcome of the risk profile will help you meet the duty to show that you've consulted them and also to help you to create a complete record of your risk assessment. Additionally, we've also provided a template, which Ellie's getting up on the screen now. This will help you to record all of the relevant parts of your assessment to meet the record-keeping duty. The template includes a section where you can record your risk factors, as well as your risk levels and evidence for each kind of content harmful to children. Now, the Act lists the 4 kinds of primary priority content and 8 kinds of priority content that you must assess, as well as setting out a definition for non-designated content. These different kinds are linked to different safety expectations in the Act, namely preventing minors from encountering primary priority content and protecting children from priority content. We've provided pages for you here which capture primary priority content, and non-designated content. You can use the summary boxes to learn more about each kind of content harmful to children, and they also link through to the relevant pages in our guidance on harmful content as well. Finally, you've got to make an assessment of non-designated content for your children's risk assessment. Ofcom has to identify types of content that we believe meet the definition for non-designated content. These are depression content and body stigma content. We recommend that you consider our types and also identify any other kinds that are relevant to your service for assessment. You can use the framework from the Children's Register of Risks to consider if a kind of content might be non-designated content, and if so, you can assess the risks to children from that kind of content. Where your children's risk assessment identifies the presence of non-designated content, you must notify Ofcom of the kinds and incidents of such content. And here we've provided an email address in the tool that you can use to do this. So in our Children's Register of Risk, we set out the links between different features and functionalities and particular kinds of content harmful to children, which are then captured in the children's risk profiles to help you understand the risks presented by these kinds of content harmful to children on your service. We've provided a questionnaire to help you understand this. Ellie is now going to walk you through how to use it.
So as Jess has just mentioned, the majority of step 1 is actually functioning as a questionnaire. And the way that this works is that on the left-hand side of the screen, you're getting asked questions about your functionality that you've got available on your service. And what you'll do is you'll make your selections on the left. The moment you make your selection, on the right-hand side, you'll see information pertaining specifically to the risk factor that is associated with the functionality that you've selected on the left. So you've got a summary of the risk factor itself, as well as a list of the associated kinds of content harmful to children that is applicable to you based off of that risk factor that is associated with your service. Further down, you've also got access to more information that looks at exactly how that content relates to the risk factor that you've selected. All this information is available to you here at any time, and you can enter back into the tool at any time, but we'll also play it back to you multiple times throughout the tool as well. From here as well, you've got your save and come back later function, so if you wanted to leave at any point, you can do, and you'll be able to return to whatever progress you've made at this point.
Brilliant. So the kinds and number of risk factors that you identify should be considered as you move to assess each kind of content harmful to children and assign risk levels. There are specific risk factors which our evidence shows correlates to an increased likelihood of certain kinds of content harmful to children. Every service is different, but we think that the children's risk profiles are a valuable tool to help you identify areas of increased risk and to understand how functionalities, either in isolation or in combination, could impact risk on your service. The risk factors have been drawn from evidence and analysis set out in our Children's Register of Risk. We also provide general risk factors, which are relevant for all user-to-user or search providers, as they are common features. In particular, under the general risk factor we provide for user age, we lay out our understanding of the risks to children in different age groups based on our developmental stages evidence. You can find more about this in the Children's Register of Risks. I'll now pass back to Ellie to talk you through the summary of this page.
So as you've gone through your questionnaire as well as read about the general risk factors, you then come through to a summary page. This page, as mentioned before, will give you a playback of all the information that you've gathered throughout the step. So this has all the summaries as well as all of the information around how that risk factor relates to the content harmful to children. On the left-hand side, you've also got a playback of all the answers that you've given throughout the tool with a very simple edit function that allows you to go back in and amend anything that you've put in. That will then take you straight back to the summary page. On this page as well, you've got a download function that allows you to download a PDF of all the risk factors and all the information that's available on this page for easy access after the fact. And you've also got access here to your unique reference number. As you move through from the summary page, you then move on to the checklist. The checklist gives you a view of all the things that you should have done and all the things you should have recorded before you move on to the next step. We also have access to the record-keeping template here again, as well as links out to other supporting resources. Now that I move back to our big overview page, this gives you a view of all the steps again. And what you can see here is we've now got access to steps 2 and 3. So we'll move into step 2, where we've got another introduction page before moving into our overview of the step. This overview gives you a view of all of the pages that exist within the step itself, as well as the headers that are associated with each one of them. And for now, we'll go into our content harmful to children page. This page plays back again all the types of content harmful to children that we played back to you in step 1, but now with the added functionality that the risk factors that you selected as part of step 1 will now show as associated with that type of content. These summary boxes will still take you through to the correct page of the guidance documents, and you can still see the information on how the risk factors relate to that particular harmful content as well. Move back to Jess to talk about the rest of the tool, rest of the step.
Awesome, thanks. So step 2 is the point where you've got to use evidence to assess the level of risk of harm from content harmful to children, covering the 4 kinds of primary priority content, 8 kinds of priority content, and any non-designated content you've identified for assessment. If you've chosen to use Ofcom's types of non-designated content, you should have at least 14 risk levels at the end of this step. Service providers have to assess the risk presented by content harmful to children on the service. When you're doing this, you have to take into account Ofcom's children's risk profiles and any risk factors you've identified, including considering the number of children in different age groups on the service. You've got to consider the characteristics of your service, including the presence of specific functionalities, such as those which enable adults to search for or contact other users, predictive search, and the functionalities and features that affect how much children use the service. You've also got to think about existing controls. So you should consider how the design and operation of your service, including any existing controls or mitigations, affect risk on your service. We want you to assess risk as it exists at the time of the assessment, and this involves considering existing controls. However, you shouldn't simply point to mitigations and assume that they lower risk. Any consideration of existing mitigations must be accompanied or supported by evidence as to the efficacy of those controls you have in place. Now, in terms of evidence, we expect all services to use core evidence, which is evidence we know that all services will hold, or evidence that Ofcom has produced. And we expect some services, such as larger services or those which have identified multiple specific risk factors for a kind of content harmful to children, to also consider enhanced evidence in their assessment. The kinds of evidence you use should be decided on a harm-by-harm basis, and you should use as much evidence as you can to arrive at an accurate picture of the level of risk to children on your service. That being said, we recognise that for smaller services, the evidence base will be smaller. For example, you may have fewer existing controls or fewer additional characteristics to consider. The one page I'll call out in a bit more detail is the evidence on user age page. So in your children's risk assessment, you have to assess your service's user base. We expect this to reflect an understanding of how many users are children and assessing if child users are in different age groups. We recognise that different service providers will have different levels of understanding and evidence about this, but we do note that you should not rely on self-declared age or your minimum age requirement in your terms of service as evidence of the actual age of children on your service. Considering this, we expect your children's risk assessment to err on the side of caution when assessing the scope for children to be impacted by harmful content, including thinking about children under your minimum age limit. We lay out guidance here on the different kinds of evidence you can use to understand the age of your users, but we expect you to use the best available information about the users on your service and to familiarise yourself with any relevant data protection legislation. So you should be using this evidence to think about the likelihood and impact of children encountering each kind of content harmful to children. On each of these pages, we've included some guiding points and questions to help you consider the likelihood and impact of risk of harm to children. We have also included risk level tables, which will help you to make sense of the evidence you've assessed about your service regarding each kind of content harmful to children, to arrive at a risk level for that kind of content. These are designed to support you to consider a range of evidence about the nature and design of your service and to make a final judgment. We've provided one general risk level table. This is different to the illegal content risk assessment. This will help services to make judgments about all of the kinds of content harmful to children. Now, there's a lot of detail involved in step 2, and it's worth noting the guidance is here to support you, not to restrict you. If there are ways to meet the children's risk assessment duties which adapt what we've set out here and make more sense to you and your organisation, then that's all right, as long as you can demonstrate that you've met the duties. We also provide a checklist at the end of step 2 where you can check that you've completed all of your requirements and fulfilled any record-keeping duties. Now, moving to step 3, the tool helps you to meet the related record-keeping duties for the children's risk assessment and also the children's safety duties regarding any measures you implement and how to manage and mitigate the risks you've identified in step 2. Ellie's now going to talk you through some of the pathways you might take through step 3.
Thanks, Jess. So in step 3, the functionality of the tool is that we will provide you with a list of the measures that are applicable to you based off of the responses to the questionnaires in step 1, as well as the step 3 questionnaire. So you'll be asked a number of questions throughout step 3. The first one being how many monthly active users your service has. This is based off of our codes of practice, where 7 million is listed as about 10% of the UK population. For the purposes of the demo today, we're going to be going through as a small, low-risk service. So I'm putting myself down to have less than 700,000 UK users. And then the next page, the risk level page, will be looking at the risk assessment that you've just completed in step 2. And we're looking for you to input the level of risk that you have assessed as part of that process. As you go through, you'll have to make a selection for each one of the types of content harmful to children, and that includes the non-designated content as well that's been identified by Ofcom. At the bottom of the page, we've got a question relating to whether you've identified any other kinds of non-designated content. For the purpose of this run-through of the demo, I'll be saying no to that question. And then we've got a question relating to the terms of service on your service, which asks whether these types of content are currently prohibited. Again, currently just saying that we are prohibiting every type of content harmful to children. And then when we continue on through to the content of step 3, we then get access to our recommended safety measures. These measures are recommended to you based off of the way that you've just responded to these questions in step 3, as well as some of the risk factors that are applicable to your service based off of your responses to step 1. On this page, You can easily enter any of these sections with, for example, the content moderation measures, where the link on the top of the page will take you through, again, to the specific page of that particular piece of guidance. And then you've got your particular measures that are related to your service here. You can use the reference numbers in these boxes to then refer back to the documents that we're linking at the top of the page. Move your way through all of the measures that way, or going back to the page, you can also download a list of all the recommended safety measures. So this gives you a PDF that provides you all the information that is available on those pages as well. Now, I've talked a lot about dynamic content and the way that this works, so I'll show that now just by going back to the first section of this step again. I'll now go through as a different service. So for now, I'll select more than 7 million UK users. And we're going to make ourselves into a service that has assessed their risk to be higher than the previous service. So in this instance, we would come through as what would be considered a multi-risk service. The other thing I'm going to do is that at the end here, where we're talking about any other types of non-designated content, I'm going to say, yes, we have assessed another type of non-designated content. What you'll see now is that we're moving through to a different question than what we did previously. So this is a question relating specifically to the non-designated content that you've now said you've assessed. What you can see is that this question is only being asked of you because you have said yes to that question at the bottom of the page. So what this shows is that this tool at the moment will give you dynamic questions and dynamic content based off the way that you've responded to other questions. So we won't ask you anything that doesn't apply. Moving back into our recommended safety measures page, you can now see that we've got an increased amount of measures applicable to you based off of the fact that the service is large and also based off the fact that it's considered a multi-risk service. Again, works exactly the same way as before. You can see the list of measures that are applicable to you, and you've got direct access to the guidance documents at the top of the page. I'll move back to Jess to talk through the rest of step 3.
Great. So the safety measures we've shown you in this step are from Ofcom's Protection of Children Codes of Practice, which relates to meeting the safety duties. Complying with these recommended measures is one way to comply with your safety duties. You can also choose to apply alternative measures. If you do this, you need to demonstrate how the measure meets the relevant safety duty. We also include guidance here on how to complete the record of your children's risk assessment. Now, moving to the checklist for step 3, this gives a view of the things you should have completed and recorded before moving to the final step, which is step 4. So step 4 is all about reviewing and updating your children's risk assessment. There are specific requirements in the Act which we have provided guidance on both here and in the Children's Risk Assessment Guidance. Under the Responsibility, Oversight and Monitoring page, we've provided some information on how to report your risk assessment through appropriate governance channels and remind you of how to notify Ofcom of any non-designated content that you find. You've also got to keep your risk assessment up to date, and we recommend that you review this at least annually. You may also need to update your children's risk assessment if Ofcom changes its children's risk profiles. We have a link here where you can sign up to updates and be alerted if such changes happen. Finally, if you intend to make a significant change to the design or operation of your service, you need to carry out a new children's risk assessment relating to this change before implementing it. We've included guidance here on the kinds of things that might amount to a significant change and so trigger this duty. We've also included some specific examples to help you to understand the situations when this might be the case. And with that, we've reached the end of step 4. So we'll let you kind of explore the pages yourself in your own time, and we'll now move to the Q&A. I think Ali will be joining us back on stage.
Well, thanks, Ellie and Jess. That was a really helpful run through both the duties and the toolkit to help. I'm going to refresh our Q&A page so I can see what questions have come in. But I know that we also have some pre-submitted ones, which I have in front of me as well. So I suspect we're going to mainly be coming to Jess here, but Ellie, you are on hand should we need any toolkit advice. But Jess, you're on the risk and governance team. One of the questions that we had submitted in advance was whether it would be possible to show an example of the risk assessment being filled out for one of the risks. So I assume that they mean one of the types of priority content or primary priority content. What do you think of that proposal?
So it's worth noting that the Children's Risk Assessment Guidance does lay out kind of our expectations for how to complete a suitable and sufficient risk assessment. And in the guidance, we've provided examples of how to use the risk level tables and examples for kind of deciding what kinds of evidence you can use in your assessment as well. In addition, you've seen the template and the digital support tool. These will also support you in carrying out the necessary steps and meeting the record-keeping requirements specifically. We'll be reviewing and updating these guidance, tools and templates over time. However, it's, I think, also worth saying that the children's risk assessment has to be specific to your service. So it's up to each service provider to kind of demonstrate that you've understood the requirements for your service specifically.
Yep. I think one of the very useful parts of the guidance as well is the annex at the back, where we've got examples of how the risk level tables should be used. So the kinds of features, the kinds of evidence that a hypothetical online service would use to reach a conclusion of low, medium, high risk. They're quite useful resources, I think.
Definitely, and they are harm specific as well. So if you're worried about specific kinds of content harmful to children, they're a great resource to look through.
Great, thank you. We have a question as well from about community websites here. So how can we assess if this is relevant to our service or our community website?
So I think there's a couple of different things I can point to as well here. First of all, we've got the regulation checker tool, which is whether you're in scope of the whole Online Safety Act and for the illegal content duties as well. Next, the Children's Access Assessment will help you to determine if you're in scope of the children's safety duties, the children's risk assessment duties specifically. We've also got the Children's Access Assessments Guidance, which will help you to kind of determine that for your service specifically. We're also, I think, providing in the chat a guide for small services, which we're putting in the useful materials section for the session as well.
Great, that's really helpful. And I suppose, generally speaking, proportionality is a golden thread that runs through all of our guidance, all of our policies, all of our codes of practice as well. So we would, all other things being equal, expect a little less of smaller services than we would of large services with more resources and significantly prima facie more risks. Okay, one more pre-submitted question, which is from the gaming sector. What do online games with multiplayer user-to-user elements need to be aware of? Do they need to think about direct messaging, group chat, or voice chat?
So it sounds like you're kind of calling out specific features or functionalities here, and the best place you can look to for that is the children's risk profiles. This is in the Children's Risk Assessment Guidance document, and we have kind of all of the evidence associated with those in the Children's Register of Risk. So these capture how do those specific features and functionalities lead to increased risks on your service, and kind of what you should be aware of when carrying out your children's risk assessment and thinking about those.
Okay. Excellent. I'm going to go to the questions coming in live now, and we have some good upvoting going on. So the top question is from Mark. When it comes to providing evidence within the risk assessment, you mentioned that self-declared age is not to be used as evidence of the age of a user. Given many platforms will not have alternative age verification measures in place yet, how do you suggest we evidence our user base and assess the risk accordingly?
Yeah, so I think what you were just speaking about proportionality is really important here. We are completely aware that and alive to the kind of issue that services will have different levels of evidence and understanding about user age. We do provide kind of our own evidence base on this in the Children's Risk Assessment Guidance, the risk profiles, and the Register of Risk as well. We understand that you'll have different amounts of evidence and understanding on the area, and the guidance is also structured to support kind of a large range of circumstances. What we recommend is that you use the best available evidence that you have, both kind of in-house and what we've provided to you in all of our resources as well. I think what we just want to say about self-declaration and your minimum age requirements is that these are not evidence, and I think there's a lot of evidence we've captured in our own resources that these aren't strong kind of evidence to prove the age of any users on your service. We don't have recommendations about estimating the number of child users. However, we just recommend that you should take a conservative view of the potential number and age of children on your service for the purpose of the children's risk assessment. So this just means to kind of err on the side of caution when you're thinking about the scope for children to be impacted by harmful content.
Okay. Thanks, Jess. And is it fair to say that each time you're making a decision on your risk level for each type of content, you're bringing in the range of evidence about all these different factors to make that decision. So age is one piece, but complaints, our register of risks are things that you should look at in the round in order to inform that judgment per category of harm, type of harm.
Yeah, all of those core inputs that we spoke through in the tool are kind of evidence that we have either provided or we believe all services should have available to them. So user complaints as well, as you've mentioned, the register of risks, any third-party kind of evidence and research as well on your service. These can all be really useful resources for thinking about the age of users on your service.
Yeah, and we know, we have lots of good evidence that self-declaration is not an effective method of age assurance, and that children, will give a false age. And so I suppose some of the evidence we provide is about the types of service that children are likely to access. We've looked at that in our children's access assessment guidance, and we also consider it in the materials that we've published as part of this statement as well.
Definitely. I think also that general kind of user-based risk factor on the developmental stages of children can be a really helpful resource.
Thanks, Jess. Okay, I'll move us on. A question from Steve. Does the record-keeping template act as the risk assessment document as well, or do we design our own risk assessment document? Now, I know we've talked about this a lot internally, Jess, so do you want to give your review on that one?
So the risk assessment is a process that you've got to go through, and then you've got to make the risk assessment record to capture kind of the key details of the risk assessment that you've made kind of internally. We provide guidance on what should be included in this record, but it's true that the kind of template we've provided will help you to meet those record-keeping requirements as well.
Yeah. So the risk assessment record may be everything you need. You may have a risk assessment document that aligns to your existing processes. The important is that you do your risk assessment and meet those duties, and you record your assessment and meet those duties.
Yeah, so you can use your own methodology, you can use your own approach, but you just need to kind of demonstrate to us that you've fulfilled those risk assessment duties and also the record-keeping duties as well. And the template is a perfect tool to use to do that.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Lucy. This is about thresholds, and it may actually stray over into our work on codes of practice and the safety duties. So if we need to bring that into the next session, we can do. But we mentioned that the thresholds in, I think this is in step 3, are for all UK users. The example we used was over 7 million UK users. In the guidance risk tables, we specify different thresholds based on monthly average users for UK child users, so 1,000 to 1 million. Could you clarify expectations here, or what the guidance on these thresholds for children's risk assessment is? So I know, Jess, that in the risk assessment guidance, which is your specialist subject today, we do have those risk tables. So if you want to comment on those, that'd be great. Or if I need to take that to the code session, I can do.
No, it's a good question. So for the purpose of the children's risk assessment, you should use the thresholds in the risk level tables that we've provided in the guidance and in the tool as well. I think what you're commenting on with the 700,000 to 7 million, I think that's more in relation to the application of the codes of practice. The reason why we've kind of presented those both here is because the tool merges those separate duties. But for the children's risk assessment, you want to look at the guidance we've provided either in the children's risk assessment guidance or in the digital tool for that step. Okay, so to check my understanding, if you're using the thresholds in the risk tables, that's about the outcome of your risk assessment, negligible, low, medium, high, whereas the other thresholds, including the 7 million threshold, is about the safety duties and the codes measures that we recommend under the codes of practice. Yes, so in the risk level tables, we're using size as kind of one factor to consider in terms of allocating kind of a medium, low or high kind of level of risk, either for kind of impact or potential likelihood of a child encountering content harmful to children. But then that's a different kind of metric you're considering when you're applying the codes kind of for a large service.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Jess. Okay, the next question is from Nikita. This is a question about, with a few elements to it. So if the company providing the service has prohibited children from visiting a specific part of the platform containing harmful content by implementing HEAA, and it's then decided that children are unlikely to access that part of the service, when they're doing their children's risk assessment, what kind of service should they say that they are? Social media, messaging, pornography? I guess it's worthwhile stepping back and thinking about how you conduct a risk assessment for your service on that point?
So you've got to do a children's risk assessment for services or parts of services that are likely to be accessed by children. So as you're kind of going through that process, you'll identify the risk factors that are relevant to that part of the service that you've determined is likely to be accessed by children. It would be, I think, helpful probably to clarify this in your record, just this decision-making process and how you are considering risk and how you are prohibiting children across those different areas of your service. But in terms of the specific risk factors, I think selecting any that are relevant to the risks that children may experience is probably the best approach to go with.
Okay, great. And so let's make a hypothetical service. I can feel Ofcom lawyers twitching as I say so. But if you have a large service that you do an illegal content risk assessment for, you assess the whole service, all of its user-to-user elements, but some of that service is age-gated, and so child users can't use it. Some of it is open to child users. It's this part of the service, which is open to child users, that you need to do the children's risk assessment for.
That's right. And if that part of the service had kind of functionalities that we would associate with social media services laid out in the Register of Risk, then you might select that service risk factor. However, it's possible to select multiple if all of those kind of functionalities, for example, messaging, are kind of relevant to that part of the service as well.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to take a question about the tool, actually. So this speaks to Ellie and my potential future plans. So while the tool is useful, it does not provide any way of recording information about the service and the inputs relied on. This has to be done in separate documents. This may be inconvenient for businesses with multiple user-to-user services who may want to keep all of this written information in one place for easy access. Is it correct that Ofcom will not penalise businesses who choose not to use the online tool and/or the written record templates, provided that this information is adequately recorded? Ellie, I'll come to you on what we might want to do in future and where we're at in the development of our toolkits. But I think I can start by confidently saying you will not be penalised for not using our template, and you will not be penalised for not using the toolkit. They are not required. They are simply there to help services who are looking for extra reassurance or extra guidance on how to meet the duties. Even the guidance itself is guidance on how to meet legal duties, and you can look at the Act itself if you prefer to find your own way there. But Ellie, we do want to keep working on this toolkit in future, so this kind of feedback is really helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much for providing that feedback as well. And I think at the moment we're working our way through a backlog of things that we're hoping to do in future. And the thing that you've just mentioned there as well is like the ability to go through the tool and automatically fill in record keeping templates and things like that. That is already on the top, quite high on our list of things that we want to do. And we know that will have a significant impact on the ease of filling in those records. So, yeah.
And any feedback today or while you're using the tool is stuff that we will read. Okay, a couple more questions before we finish up. I note one from Andrew about age verification, so we'll take that later on in our session on highly effective age assurance. I will look at a question on risk scoring. Will risk scoring be provided for specific age groups of children rather than just a risk score for all children generally in respect of a particular kind of content? Does that make sense, Jess?
Yeah, so the duty is to give separate consideration to different age groups of children as you're carrying out your children's risk assessment, and you can kind of fulfill this requirement in any way that suits you best. If it's more suitable for you to have separate risk levels for different age groups of children and you have the evidence kind of required to do that, then you're very welcome to do so. And I think we'll talk a bit more about kind of age and some of our codes of practice in the next few sessions. But simultaneously, if you don't have the evidence kind of to be able to support an approach like that, there isn't kind of a specific expectation to have separate risk levels or separate risk scores for different age groups of children. You've just got to demonstrate to us that you've met the requirement to give separate consideration to different age groups of children.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got two. We're just at time now, but I'll try and do the last two in a rapid fire style answer. Penny asks, will risk assessments be available to platform users or commercial partners, for example, advertisers? I think there's no general duty to publish a risk assessment. If platforms choose to do this, they may. with the exception of certain types of categorized services who need to publish a summary of their risk assessment, and we'll be setting out the list of categorized services later this year.
Yes, yeah, that's
Perfect. Max asks, if a platform has concluded that children are unlikely to access their service, and let's assume that they've done this based on evidence and they've satisfied the requirements of the Children's Access Assessment Duty, but nonetheless have voluntarily chosen to conduct the children's risk assessment and implement any additional measures to make their platform more safe generally, do they still have an obligation to adhere to the codes? No, you don't. Firstly, all of the codes are optional ways of complying with your safety duties and select other duties. And secondly, if the duties don't apply and you're following the children's codes just for good practice, then no, we would be looking at whether those children's duties applies, not whether you adhered to the codes. Good. Okay, thank you for letting me steal those last two, Jess. We are at time for that session. We're having about an hour's break for lunch now, so we'll be here at about 2:05 or just after, and we'll be moving on to the safety duties, our codes of practice, and all the very important measures that we need to put in place to keep children safe from harm. So I look forward to seeing you then.